I think it's a testament to my generation when constantly I go on Twitter, I see things like healing and trauma. Some people kind of say, "Oh, you Gen Z guys are doing way too much." But no, I think it's quite a positive sign. We're talking about healing and trauma. We're saying not repeating the same mistake. So joining us today, we have the amazing Dr. Kameelah. Kameelah, is it Kameelah, sir?
Kameelah.
Kameelah, who is an expert in what we're about to talk about today. So yeah, first and foremost, what is trauma?
Ooh, well, thank you first for inviting me. And I actually am not of the opinion that your generation is doing too much. I think you're
Okay,
doing
good.
exactly what needs to be done. So this question of trauma, what I've mentioned before is that there are some words that sort of make their way into sort of general and casual conversation. And so they
Yeah.
might lose their technical or clinical meaning. But essentially, trauma could be an event that someone experiences or witnesses, right? So even if it doesn't directly happen to you, but you witness an event that is basically overwhelming in the sense that you feel powerless to prevent it, that it might happen repeatedly or unexpectedly, and you don't have sort of the emotional or kind of tangible resources to cope with how difficult and painful and challenging that event was.
Wow.
So that's a very broad, kind of definition.
Yeah.
But ultimately, so given that it's a broad definition, that means that it'll be dependent on the individual, right? So it could be something that you witness and you're startled, right? That you're afraid, that you feel overwhelmed, that you feel alone. And so included in that definition or inherent in it is a lack of safety, right? And so, if something is, you feel unsafe, you feel fearful, those kind of emotions also tend to overwhelm you emotionally, right? And so that's when we get this kind of flight or freeze or fight or freeze response, because your mind, your body is just overwhelmed trying to process what is happening. And so for many people, they understand perhaps trauma, we might call it with a big T, right? So war or violence, things that happen that are undeniably traumatic or kind of fear inducing. But there's also traumas with a small t, right? And that could be the loss of someone unexpectedly. That could be witnessing something really powerfully negative happen to someone else and you cannot prevent it, right? And so if we think about the world that we live in now, right, we can
social
see,
media
especially social media, the difference is perhaps from other generations is that you have access to the ability to witness traumatic events happen in real time all around the world, right? And this was not the case previously, right? You might have local news, or even if something happened, it took so long for that news to travel that, you might have been a bit more prepared. But now we log into any social media platform and you have news from Myanmar, you have news from Palestine, you have news from Zimbabwe, and all of it, right? You're able to witness and still feel very powerless, right? To do things, to do anything about it.
Sorry to interject, but the question then is, what is said about my generation? And obviously this is me acting as a proxy. I don't believe this, but me acting as a proxy. Are we just a bunch of crybabies? Whereas you hear like people from like who are in much older than I am, they'll say things like, "Oh, well, in my days we just got on with it. We had a stiff upper lip and just got on with it. You lot just want to complain about everything now." What would you say about that as someone who's in that field?
You know what? I would say that the way that our or previous generations may have coped was honestly with extreme denial, right? And feeling like the recognition of that trauma was a luxury, right? Because survival was a priority. And so now there's a greater recognition and expression of what is being witnessed and what is being felt. And so, at times, what I tend to believe is that our sort of glorification of that resilience, right? Of that, just keep a stiff upper lip and keep moving and you go forward, is actually a trauma response.
Wow.
Right? Of paralysis, of just the inability to recognize the pain that is being experienced because of the fear of being continually overwhelmed by it.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So I think, sometimes we admire like, oh, wow, they just seem to be able to move through so many painful experiences, whether it was war or migration or,
Yeah.
economic sort of pressures, and they just got on with it. Right. I would argue that they have not, right? They
Okay.
just have not recognized it. It's still
So
there.
then what would be some typical characteristics of someone who's suffering from trauma or has trauma?
Right. So often it is the aversion to even speaking of it. Right.
Mm.
So anything could be a very innocent question. Perhaps you might ask your parents or your grandparents, right? So what contributed to us like moving to this place or being here, right?
Yeah.
And, they will just say, well, why should we talk about that? Right. Or it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's over. It's in the past. Right. And so
Yeah.
this rigidity and reluctance to even speak of certain events, right, can be indicative of trauma. It
Wow.
could be in the how unwilling or inflexible, right, certain people might be to acknowledging even the pain of others, right? Because
Wow.
it can become a mirror, right? If I acknowledge your pain, then I might have to acknowledge my own. And
Mm-hmm.
I am not ready to
Mm-hmm.
do that. And I don't feel equipped to even begin to process how those things impacted me. So you see sort of this emotional numbing, right? Sometimes
Okay.
it looks like apathy. It looks like I will refuse to express any emotion other than sort of strength and resilience and sort of fortitude and stoicism.
Okay.
Because if I acknowledge that, then does that mean that I'm a victim? Does that mean that
Mm.
I have suffered in a way that I couldn't control? Right. And so that lack of vulnerability and not wanting to even be in that space, right, could also be
Yeah.
indicative of someone who's experienced a trauma.
Yeah. And then how important would you say that it is for someone to go through therapy?
Oh, I mean, I recommend it for everyone.
Okay.
It just in
I'm
the
with you. I saw a meme that says when I hit the jackpot, me and my boys, I'm taking all my boys to therapy, and I thought, hell yeah, that's a
Mhm.
goal. We speak about all these goals about having men who say, oh, I want to have a house with this many women or whatever it may be.
Yes,
But really and truly, I think, you know what? Before you continue damaging other people, why don't you work on yourself? That's a real goal.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, what a gift would that be for someone to say, you know what, I just came upon all this money, and I'm going to pay for healing for all of my friends, right? I mean, what
Exactly.
what a gift, right? And so I think one, I would say that even contemplating therapy or counseling for people is also very frightening. And
Oh,
as a psychologist, I think there's often we talked about the stigma attached to mental health, right? But what
yes.
I would say is that my experience have been that many people of color, especially, are very willing, right, to go
Mm.
through a process of healing. What we are not willing to do is be vulnerable, perhaps, to those who have been our oppressors.
You read my mind. I think you're more than a psychologist. I think you have the skill of telepathy as well. I was just about to say how important me as a black man to go to a black therapist, for example.
I tweeted about this in January. I remember I was about to
Yeah.
make dinner and I just said, for people of color who are looking for a competent
Hmm.
therapist, one of the first
Yeah.
questions you should ask, right? Just even in an initial kind of consultation is to
Yeah.
ask that person, white and a person of color, what are your thoughts about the psychological impact of racism and oppression, right?
Hmm.
And wait for an answer,
Mm.
right? Because the answer will tell you a lot that you need to know about potentially what that experience will be with that person. If that therapist,
Mm.
especially if they're white, answers in a way that either minimizes or exposes their lack of awareness of how important that is and just how impacted we are by white
Yeah.
supremacy, by oppression, by anti-Black racism, by
Yeah.
colonization, if they have not considered, right, the deep impacts of those systems, then truly will they be able to help guide you to a place where you can understand not just sort of your own personal vulnerabilities, but historical and
Mm.
intergenerational trauma as well. So I think that what we need, especially as people of color, are those that understand the systems that we in that are not designed for us to be well, right?
Yes.
White supremacy is designed, right, intentionally and purposefully to keep us sick, right, to keep us
Yeah.
in a state of believing messages of inferiority and believing that we have no power. And so when you think about trauma as an event that happens perhaps repeatedly and unexpectedly and leads to harm that is overwhelming, right? That could be daily microaggressions. That could be just being so consciously aware of the ways that you are systematically subjugated, right?
Wow.
And so this is beyond sort of like your own abilities and capabilities and talents and skills, right? You can be a highly educated, intelligent, aware person and still have to contend with the systems that are designed to keep you subjugated, right?
100%.
And so when you come into therapy and you're sitting with someone who looks like the oppressor,
Yeah.
right, in more
For
ways
real.
than one, right?
Yep.
Then how it is a matter of instinct, right? That you will say, why should I trust this person, right? Why should I open
Mm,
up and explore the kinds of experiences that I've had with you when you look like the very people who harm me on a daily basis and have also harmed my ancestors, have harmed the people in my life, right?
yes.
That's a legitimate question to ask. So I think is actually kind of a misnomer, this idea that Black folks don't go to therapy. Like, no, we don't want to go to therapy with you.
I think that's very valid. But then on the point of finding someone that looks like you,
Yeah.
which I think is I think it's very important. I mean,
Yeah.
I heard Snoop Dogg say something like, no, I went to a white therapist because I didn't want someone who knew me as Snoop Dogg. I wanted someone who doesn't know me as a celebrity. I mean, that we can kind of
Isn't that
unpack that.
how he makes his money? I mean,
Exactly. I,
but
no, for
okay.
real.
Yeah.
No, I get that. I mean, yeah, whatever. That's not even
Yeah.
the point I want to make.
Yeah.
But I feel like, okay, so people who may be our young listeners who may be a bit like shy or a bit intimidated by it,
Yes.
what would a typical therapy session look like for someone? 'Cause people, we hear these buzzwords a lot, but many people might not know. Like, I mean, for me, I'll be honest, I've never been to therapy, and it's something that I do want to go into and take it very seriously. But I just think of the scene of, I'm showing my age here, which is not very old, but I'm showing my age here, of Jim Carrey in The Mask when he sat down with a shrink
Yes.
and he's saying that, and then the guy's saying, guys, we all wear masks. We all have social masks. And it's like, no, this is my mask. And, you always have that image of, okay, I'm going to sit down and be told, okay, open up, tell me about that kind of
Yes.
Hollywood-esque kind of therapy.
Yes.
Is there any truth to that? Or what is it like really?
So I would have to preface it by saying it will depend on the type of therapy that you're engaged in.
Okay.
And so I'm a psychologist that's trained in what's called psychodynamic therapy, and I'm also
Okay.
a family systems therapist. So what that means
Okay.
is, in terms of psychodynamic therapy, I'm very interested in your early experiences, your childhood, sort of those formative sort of experiences and circumstances that shaped
Just to
who you are.
interject, when you say childhood, what age are we talking about?
It could be as far back as people remember, right? Again, depending on what
Okay.
happened to you, some people say, I don't have many memories before 9 years old, right?
Wow.
Some people say, I can remember being 3, right? And
Wow.
so,
Yep.
thinking about who do you consider family? Who were those individuals in your life that cared for you, that loved you, that nurtured you, or perhaps there was a lack of that nurturing, which is also, right, very impactful. So I'm going to be curious about your family, about those experiences, and also in the context of family and community, right? And then sort of the third element of that, so psychodynamic therapy within a family system, would also use a narrative approach, which means that
Yeah.
I'm also very curious about the story that you tell about yourself and whether that story includes what's called like problem saturated sort of framing, right? And so I'm going to be looking for, there are, of course, a lot of challenges that we face in the course of our lives, but the
Yeah.
story that we tell about those challenges are also sort of very indicative of, our beliefs about ourselves and, how we approach even future problems. And so
Yes.
if I can sort of challenge the story that you've concluded about yourself and help you develop a new one, right? One that looks at the
Oh,
unique
wow.
outcomes, right? So
Wow.
everything isn't terrible always, right? This is just a fact,
Yes, of course.
right? And
Yes.
so if I say, well, think about a time when you did feel loved, you felt cherished, you felt really appreciated and adored by the people in your life. Tell me about that moment, right? For some people, that's really hard because they've completely blocked that out. because it doesn't fit with the story that they've told.
I'm already welling up. Come, let's I'll come after the session and I'll pay for that session afterwards.
um, yeah. So the kind of therapy that I offer is one that I think
Yeah.
is necessary, especially for people of color. That we are not individuals. We're very sort of collective minded, and so I cannot understand you without understanding the people in your life, right? The communities that you're a part of, and the history
Wow.
of those communities, right? That you're a part of, and so. When I sit down initially with someone, to gather
Yeah.
information and ask them like, what do you believe the problem to be? Right. And they'll say like, oh, well, it's just, I always feel depressed and nothing seems to work. And, I don't
Yeah.
feel really supported and my relationships are really strained. I feel disconnected from everyone. I said, okay, well, I need to know how you're defining the problem and the issue that's bringing you here. I want to get to know a little bit more about, so it becomes, I want you to share your story first, right?
Yes.
Sometimes people come and they think, okay, I'm here, fix me. Right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
it is a fact that you are the expert on your own life, right? I'm going to play the role as a guide, facilitator. I'll ask questions because I
Yeah.
believe in the wisdom that you already have about yourself, right? And it's
Yeah.
just kind of drawing that out. And so there are probably more questions that are asked than sort of advice giving, right? So that is the kind of therapy that I do. Others
Yeah.
want something that's more solution focused and very cognitive, like help me change these thoughts, which are maladaptive, right? Okay, that could be one strategy, right, to help. But I think the insight is very important for people to, one, feel empowered and to also
Yeah.
know that now that I understand what's happening to me, I have so many more options, right, for how I'm going to cope,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And so in that, what I think people should know to expect is that this is also a relationship. So it's a relationship that's very different, right? Because there's an inherent lack of reciprocity, right? You're not going
Yeah.
to get to know much about me and my personal
Yeah.
life. One, because that frees you of an obligation to care for me in that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like if you sat down with your therapist and they were like, oh my gosh, I had such a horrible day yesterday. And, you'd be
Yeah.
like, how could I really trust you now to like pour out my issues and my problems?
Exactly.
So that is actually liberating, right? There is an
Wow.
expectation of care, but it's care for you. It's centered around your needs, your concerns, your ability, your strengths, but also the things that you need in order to be healthier, right? And so I think that's where sometimes it feels really awkward. And people are like, well, I
Yeah.
kind of want to know more about you, right, as a person. But what I would argue is that you will get to know me as a person, right, by the way that I treat you, by the questions that I ask, right? Like
Yeah.
by how present I am with you and how I pay attention. And so that should be comforting. I think what is hard for many people initially in the therapeutic process is that
Yeah.
vulnerability, right? Like you're a stranger. And I tell people I'm a stranger. So if I ask you a question and you're not ready to answer it, tell me that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that I
Yeah.
will always say, I'm going to ask you a difficult question and, or perhaps offer an interpretation based on my observations or things that you shared with me. Tell me if I'm wrong, right?
Wow.
So what I do
Yeah.
constantly is to reassure the person who's sitting with me, right, that
Yeah.
they have control of the pace, right, of what they disclose. That yes, I am the expert in this particular subject, but I am not the expert of their lives.
Yeah.
And so if they start to feel like I don't think I'm ready to kind of go into that area or talk about those
Yeah.
memories, then I say, then you're absolutely right. Trust yourself, right? Trust that
Okay.
maybe this is maybe too much too soon. And
Okay.
trust that when I kind of push you a little bit, it's because I believe that you can explore that area but you need to do it with support. Right.
Absolutely. No, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's such an amazing insight to what therapy entails, and I hope people who are listening do take that advice on board. And I feel like it can be a very liberating experience. But
Yes.
you mentioned the story you tell yourself.
Yes.
Immediately, what came to mind was how much weight do you feel words of affirmation have, and do they work? And would you encourage it?
So it depends on the person, right? And so
Okay.
you or your listeners might be familiar with sort of these love languages, right? So
Yes.
words of affirmation and acts of service, physical touch. So
Yeah.
it will depend on the person, and it will also depend on the kinds of experiences that they've had, whether that's traumatic, whether that's nurturing and healthy. And so there is a generation that, will say, I never, my parents never said they loved me, right?
Yes.
And again, for some, maybe they weren't parented that way. I
Hmm.
saw someone tweeted some time ago, like Black parents will say something like, they won't say I love you, they'll say, try this on.
Yeah, 100%. What do you want from McDonald's?
Right. Um, or they'll just make something, that's your favorite for dinner, right? So those are
Yes.
sort of acts of service. And now perhaps we're moving to a place where people do want sort of that verbal affirmation,
Yeah.
and it does feel good, right? Because it helps
Hmm.
you feel seen, to be validated in that way.
I was
But
just about to ask, what is it about human beings and the want to be validated? Why do human beings seek validation?
Oh, I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, it is because our chances of survival alone
Yeah.
are very, very low, right? If
Yeah.
if you are alone and by yourself, the likelihood that you will survive, right, is drastically
Mm-hmm.
reduced. We cannot,
Hmm.
right? We must be connected. We have to feel like we belong as part of, I think, a larger collective, but also that we're cared for, right? And so when we're seeking that validation, some people's like, well, I just want to be self-reliant. I don't need anyone. And those people, I'm always like, oh, boo boo, you need to come to therapy. We all have the need to be, to have that sense of belonging, right? And
Okay.
to be valued, right? To be an
Could it ever become an
invaluable.
unhealthy obsession though? Like
Yes,
I feel
it
like
can.
like clout chasing now. I think there's
Mm,
a difference between validation
yes.
and my personal experience. For me personally, of course, I like to feel validated by those who I love.
Yes.
However, as for those I don't know, I think it's very. I don't give a. I don't really care. If I'm honest, I don't. I find it very weird that okay, you think this of me. Well, I don't know you. You, especially in the world of social media.
Yes.
I feel like if, as long as my real life relationships are healthy, then
Mhm.
who cares what people think of you online because they don't know you.
Right. Well, I mean, see, so again, I think that's the difference why we cannot compare generations in this way, because
Mm.
for older generations, you were known locally, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And now there are people that assume sort of a certain degree of familiarity and intimacy based on your
yeah,
public persona, right?
yes,
And some people encourage that, right? And others, they may strategically sort of present themselves a certain way publicly, but have like a
yeah,
very, clear boundaries about their private life, right? Their intimate
yep,
space. And so I think where it becomes unhealthy is the lengths that people will go to receive validation from anyone and everyone,
yeah.
right? So that's
I
where it
find that
starts to,
extremely strange.
yes. And that might be indicative of sort of a need in their own lives that has gone
Hmm.
unfulfilled, right?
Mm.
Or wanting sort of public validation to hide the fact that they are unable to maintain or sustain intimate relationships privately,
Wow.
right? And so it is
Okay.
not unheard of for people to have thousands and thousands of followers and be incredibly
Yep.
lonely,
Of course.
right? And so
Yep.
it is understanding who are we connected to where we feel safe, right? We
Hmm.
feel that we can be our true selves, right? As we understand it in that moment, right? Because who
Yes.
you believe yourself to be changes over time. And I think also the place, where I often ask people to think about their trauma and their sense of safety and trust is, who are you with when your body feels most relaxed?
Mm.
Right? Like you don't sense the tension. You're not sort of doing what's called like high self monitor. You're not kind of monitoring
Yes.
what you say, how you say it. And so it could be the people that you laugh the loudest around, right? I mean,
Okay.
for me personally, that's one thing I really, really love about
Yeah.
being with Black people, right? Is the laughter,
For real.
right? I mean,
Yep.
it's,
Yep.
it's just, it sounds beautiful to me. It's just so
Yep.
unself-conscious, right? And so when I think about the people who I feel safest around, my body is relaxed, I can be my true self, it's people who look like me,
Hmm.
right? And that's for many, many different reasons, right? And
Yeah.
so when we think about like the validation that we receive when we're with those people that we trust and love, it is
Yeah.
because it reminds us of, I think a word that we don't use enough is like, who adores you, right? Not just loves you,
Real.
but they just like adore you and cherish you, and just simply your presence kind of makes them smile, and they really look forward to it. They feel
Yeah.
joyous, right? I mean, everyone deserves to be
Of
in the
course. I
company of
feel loved.
people. Right, right.
How do you balance that then between the validation that comes from others, but then surely there's like a time where you need to be able to be by yourself and be comfortable?
So I think where I challenge that a bit is
Okay.
in kind of like Western notions of individualism,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
And we, as a psychologist, kind of have to balance that when we're working with people of color from collectivistic societies, right? And so I
Yep.
think there's often an emphasis, right, in the West on self-reliance and
Yeah.
individualism, and that you are an entity separate and apart from everything else. And
Yep.
as a Muslim, right, as a Black Muslim, I
Yep.
believe that there is so much value in connection, right?
Of course.
And so where I think the balance has to kind of be straddled is, do I feel sort of lost and bereft and forgotten if I'm alone, right? Because that is
Mm.
indicative of a story that I'm telling about myself, right?
Okay.
So if I am alone, right, can I enjoy that time, that solitude, right? All of who we know to be our prophets and sort of great people really,
Yep.
really appreciated solitude and silence,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so if I can sit with that, and the silence doesn't sort of trigger insecurities, right? Or
Yes.
feelings of being abandoned, right? Then I can enjoy it, right? I can appreciate that. But if that feeling of sort of being alone then causes me to, be very self-critical, or, to really
Mm.
tap into insecurity or abandonment or neglect, right? Then that's
Yeah.
when it's a problem,
Yes.
right?
So I think, okay, that's a
Yeah.
very important distinction to make, I think.
Yes. Yes.
So just coming back to when you said about embracing your true self, hear this, and I mean, for me, I've definitely gone through, I would say, this feels like therapy on the podcast actually, but anyway, I'm going to say it. It's definitely gone through like a phase where, I always thought, maybe I'm too much for people, or maybe I'm like
Mm,
this, but I think, what, I remember reading, there's a palliative nurse, she deals with people at the end of their life, and she kind of
mhm,
asked them, what are your top five, what is your kind of regret in life?
mm,
And a recurring one which came number one was, I wish I lived a life which was more true to myself.
mm,
And that was
mhm.
like a recurring theme for several, I think there's like at least a couple hundred people she asked the same question and they said the same
Yeah.
thing. So I was going to ask, where does that come from? Why is it that, why do you think people are regretting that they did not live a life true to themselves?
Because it's terrifying, right?
Mm,
Because of our desire for connection and for
yeah.
belonging, we might alter, right, who we are or who we say we are at,
Mm,
because of that desire, right? We want to be
yeah.
accepted, we want to be included. And so do we risk alienation, right? Again, thinking about it from an
Mm,
evolutionary standpoint, do we risk
okay.
alienation and exclusion, right, by voicing what we think might be unpopular, right?
Mm-hmm.
By acknowledging aspects of ourselves that may cause discomfort with other people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so there are a lot of large and small ways that we're socialized to perhaps mute those aspects of ourselves that we think other people would not approve of, right? And the
Mm,
reward for muting those things, right, is the inclusion. It comes at a price,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
But we feel like, well, I can't be all of who I am, but at least I have sort of this sense of belonging that offsets that discomfort,
Okay.
right?
Wow.
But at the end of life, right, there's, it's called Eric Erickson has this theory of identity development that looks
Yeah.
at sort of later in life. It's called generativity versus stagnation, right? And
Okay.
so for elders especially, and I think this is why the connection to young people are so important, because as people
Mm-hmm.
get older, they start to wonder, did I matter, right? And who did I matter to,
Mm,
right? And if I wasn't my true self, then what will people remember of me,
okay.
right?
Yes.
And so when I see
Ooh.
people contemplate, like, have I been authentic? Have I been sincere? Did I take risks? and allow people to really see me, right? Or did
Wow.
I
Yeah.
project this persona that wasn't real, right? So, you may think, well, when I'm eulogized, would I even recognize myself? Right?
Wow.
Based on what people say. And so I think as we get older and perhaps we shed some of the fear, right,
Yeah.
of around authenticity, we really, really want to feel seen in an honest way, right?
Okay.
But that takes first, I would say, introspection. It takes, kind
Yes,
of like
of
a
course.
radical self-awareness so that we can withstand pressure to conform, right? And push back and say, there's some aspects perhaps of being a part of a communal or collective society, but there are also
Yeah.
some aspects that often requires conformity, right?
Yes, of course.
And are we comfortable with saying, I want to, again, find the balance between belonging, right, and being who I truly am? And
I
I think that's
think
a
that's
lifelong question.
I think absolutely. I mean, there's so much more I want to unpack with you. So I definitely think I'm going to have you on again. Because actually, it's funny. I came into this conversation wanting to speak specifically about Black psychology, but our conversation was absolutely beautiful. This was a healing session for me, and I hope that it's for many others out there.
Oh, thank
This has been beautiful. I'm going to post social medias in the comments and the bios. Please check out Dr. Kameelah's beautiful Twitter feed that you find a lot of information on there, and reach out. This has been the Malcolm Effect with Mamadou. Please like, comment, subscribe, whether you're listening to on Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcasts. Until next time, peace out, guys.